Hey, Tere, and welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. This little corner where darkness softens, and stories breathe quietly in the background. Before we drift into tonight's tale, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if what you hear truly feels right for you. Your comfort matters more than anything else. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time the night found you. I love seeing how our growing community gathers from so many different places. It's a reminder that even in silence, we're connected. I hope you'll allow this video to accompany you for a while. Every story here is shaped to ease your thoughts, soothe your mind, and guide you gently into the late hours with a touch of mystery and calm. So go ahead, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day melt away. And now, let's step into tonight's story together. I've never been one to delete voice messages. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's just a weird habit I picked up. Or maybe it's this deep-seated fear that once something is gone, it's truly gone forever. This story, this thing that happened to me, it all started with a message I was never supposed to get. It arrived at 2:41 in the morning. Not as a text, not even a missed call. Just a single solitary voice note, sitting there on my phone. The strangest part, the sender, it was my own phone number. Not an unknown caller, not a private number. It was my number, staring back at me from the screen. My initial reaction was to just brush it off. It had to be a glitch, right? Phones do all sorts of strange things these days. I was so close to just hitting delete without even listening. A part of me, a very big part of me, now wishes I had. But I'm also glad I didn't. It's a complicated feeling. The message itself was short, only 23 seconds long. When I first pressed play, all I heard was silence. A heavy, loaded kind of silence. Then, breathing. It was slow and uneven. The kind of breathing someone does when they're desperately trying not to panic. And then, I heard my own voice. But it wasn't a recording I recognized. It wasn't something I remembered ever saying. The voice sounded like me, but older, exhausted, and absolutely terrified. The first thing it said was my own name. Hearing your own voice say your name in that tone is unsettling. Then, it said, "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it." My heart just stopped. I slammed my thumb on the screen to pause the message. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I checked the date and time again. Las 2:41 alto. But I checked my phone's activity logs, my sleep tracker. Everything said I was dead asleep at that time. There were no outgoing messages, no recording activity, nothing. It was impossible. I couldn't bring myself to listen to the rest of it that night. The fear was too real. I waited until the sun came out, until the world felt a little safer, a little more normal. Then, with a deep breath, I played it again. This time, I forced myself to listen to the whole thing. After that first chilling sentence, it means I didn't make it. There was a long, tense pause. The breathing got a little heavier. Then, my voice came back. But this time, it was a strained whisper. They can hear me when I speak out loud. So I'm whispering now. As I listened closer, I could hear a faint sound in the background. It wasn't static, and it wasn't wind. It was movement, a soft, brushing sound, like fabric rubbing against something rough, or maybe something being dragged. Then my whispering voice returned. I don't know how long I've been here. There are no windows, but there are reflections. That line burrowed into my brain and just stayed there. Reflections? Reflections of what? If there were no windows, what could possibly be creating a reflection? The message ended with one final, cryptic warning. Whatever you do, don't answer the call. And then, it just cut off. No goodbye, no further explanation, just silence. I spent the entire day in a fog. I replayed the message over and over, trying to decipher it, trying to convince myself it was an elaborate prank. But who would do this? And how? How could they send a message from my own number, using my own voice? The day dragged on, and with every passing hour, my anxiety grew. I knew what was coming. I dreaded the clock ticking closer and closer to that time. Las 2:41 Alto M.I. was wide awake, of course. I sat on my couch, in the dark, just staring at my phone. I had the volume turned all the way down, but I knew it wouldn't matter. And then it happened. Exactly at 2:41 a.m., my phone screen lit up. The vibration was like a jolt of electricity through the silent room, and there it was. My own name, my own number, calling me. I just stared at it, frozen. Every single instinct, every fiber of my being, screamed at me not to answer. The warning from the message echoed in my head. Whatever you do, don't answer the call. The ringing felt like it went on for an eternity, but in reality, it only lasted for about 5 seconds before it stopped. Silence returned to the room, even heavier than before. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. And then, my phone buzzed again. A new notification. Another voice message had arrived. This one was longer. My hands were trembling again. But I knew I had to listen pre-meta. Had to know. I pressed play. This time, there was no whispering. This time, it was my voice again. And I was screaming. A raw, blood-curdling scream of pure terror that went on, followed by the same brushing sound from the first message, only louder now, more frantic. And then, another voice. It wasn't mine. It was low and guttural. Something that sounded ancient and wrong. It said just one thing, a single phrase that I will never, ever forget. It said, "Now, there are 2 reflections." Since that night, my life has been a living nightmare. I haven't slept properly. Every shadow looks like a figure. Every quiet moment is filled with the memory of that scream. I see my own reflection in the mirror, in shop windows, in the dark screen of my phone, and I'm terrified. I keep wondering, am I looking at me? Or am I looking at the other one? The messages stopped after that second one. The calls stopped, too, but the fear hasn't. It's a constant companion. I've started covering up all the reflective surfaces in my apartment. Mirrors, the TV screen, even the glass on picture frames. It sounds crazy, I know. But when you hear your own voice screaming from a future that you might not survive, you start doing crazy things. I don't know what they are, or what this place with reflections is. I don't know if I'm living on borrowed time. Maybe the me from that message was a version of me from another timeline, another reality, trying to warn me. Or maybe it was me from my own future, and maybe by not answering that call, I changed my fate. Or maybe I just delayed it. The scariest part is the uncertainty. Every time my phone buzzes with a notification, my heart leaps into my throat. I live in constant fear of 2:41 a.m. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Do I wait? Do I run? How do you run from a call from yourself? I'm telling this story because, well, honestly, I don't know why. Maybe to warn you, or maybe just to get it out, to feel like I'm not entirely alone with this. So if you ever get a strange message, a message from a number you shouldn't be seeing, be careful. Be very, very careful. Because sometimes, the most terrifying calls are the ones that come from inside the house, or in my case, from inside your own pocket. I'd been driving for what felt like an eternity, the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me. The radio had given up hours ago, surrendering to a wall of static. My phone was just as useless, a dead brick with no signal. Ethwas kustem, the hum of the engine, and the hypnotic rhythm of the white lines disappearing under my tires. The landscape was a monotonous blur of trees and sky. Just when I thought the road would go on forever, a sign materialized out of the dusk. It was old, wooden, the letters weathered, but clear. Welcome to Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek, the name didn't ring a bell. I'd driven this route dozens of times and never seen it. I glanced at my GPS, but the screen was blank, just a tiny icon of my car floating in a gray void. There were no other turnoffs, no alternative routes. The only way forward was straight through. So, I drove on. The town itself looked normal. Almost too normal. Neat little houses with manicured lawns lined the streets. Lights glowed warmly in every window, casting a welcoming, golden hue onto the pavement. The streets were spotless. Not a single piece of litter in sight. But something was profoundly wrong. It was the silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that swallowed every sound. There were no people walking their dogs, no kids playing in the yards, no cars passing by, no distant hum of life. Just the soft crunch of my tires on the clean asphalt. I pulled into a gas station. The sign above flickered with a friendly, retro glow. The front door was unlocked, a small bell chiming softly as I pushed it open. The air inside was still and strangely warm. Shelves were fully stocked with chips and candy, magazines neatly arranged on a rack. Behind the counter, a large analog clock hung on the wall. Its second hand was ticking. A steady, rhythmic click. But the hands weren't moving. They were frozen at 3:17. Click, click, click. A sound with no purpose. My heart started to pound a little faster. This wasn't just strange, it was impossible. My eyes scanned the room, searching for an explanation, for any sign of another living soul. That's when I saw it, scrawled on the wall behind the counter. In what looked like hurried, desperate handwriting were the words, "If you're reading this, you didn't mean to come here." A cold dread washed over me, a primal fear that made the hair on my arms stand up. Behind me, the bell chimed again, but I hadn't moved. The door swung shut with a heavy, final click, plunging the store into near darkness. He spooned around my hand, fumbling for the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. Locked, I was trapped. Panic began to set in, a tight band constricting my chest. I pounded on the glass, my shouts swallowed by the eerie quiet of the town. No one answered. No one was there. Or were they? Peering through the glass, back at the perfectly silent, perfectly lit street, I saw a flicker of movement. A curtain in the house directly across the street twitched. Just for a second, and then another and another. One by one, in the windows of the silent houses, figures began to appear. Silhouettes standing motionless, watching me. They weren't moving, just standing there. Dark shapes against the warm, inviting light. A town full of silent observers. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was this a prank? A dream? The ticking of the frozen clock seemed to grow louder, each click a hammer blow against my sanity. I looked back at the message on the wall. "You didn't mean to come here." No, I certainly didn't. This wasn't a place you found on a map. It was a place that found you. Days turned into a nightmarish blur. Or maybe it was just one long, unending day. Time had no meaning here. The sun never seemed to move in the sky, locked in a perpetual state of late afternoon. The lights in the houses never went out. The figures in the windows never moved. They just watched. I learned to ignore them, to treat them as part of the scenery, like the perfectly trimmed hedges and the spotless sidewalks. It was the only way to keep from screaming. I explored the town. Every door was unlocked. Every house was a perfect replica of the last. A dinner table set for a meal that would never be eaten. A television flickering with a blank, gray screen. Clothes laid out on a bed, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. But there was never anyone there. No photos on the walls, no personal trinkets, no history. It was a town of empty shells. A stage set for a play with no actors, only an audience. I found other messages, scratched into walls, etched onto mirrors, hidden inside books. Don't let them see you're scared. They feed on it. The road out is not the road in. Each one was a breadcrumb left by someone else who had stumbled into this trap. How many had come before me? And where were they now? Had they escaped? Or had they become one of the silent figures in the windows? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I realized the town was a test, a psychological labyrinth. The silence, the watching figures, the frozen clocket was all designed to break you, to fill you with a specific kind of despair, The road out wasn't a physical path. It was a state of mind. The previous victims had tried to fight it, to run, to hide. Their fear had been their undoing. I had to do something different. I had to play their game. So I stopped running. I stopped hiding. I started to live in the town. I'd walk down the main street, head held high, and I'd wave at the figures in the windows. I'd just sit on a park bench in the town square and read a book aloud to the empty air. I'd go into the diner, make myself a cup of coffee, and talk about my day to the vacant booths. I performed normality. I acted as if this was exactly where I wanted to be. I pretended the silence wasn't deafening, that the endless watching wasn't driving me to the brink of madness. At first, nothing changed. The figures remained still. The clock remained frozen. But then, subtle things started to happen. One day, as I walked past a house, the figure in the window wasn't there. The next day, 2 more were gone. It was working. My refusal to show fear, my acceptance of the bizarre reality, was disrupting the system. I was breaking the rules of their game. They didn't know what to do with someone who wasn't afraid. The town began to fight back. Whispers started to snake through the silence. My name carried on a breeze that didn't exist. Shadows would dart at the edge of my vision. Doors would slam shut in empty houses as I walked by. The performance became harder to maintain. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to break down. But Primer held on, forcing a smile, humming a tune, refusing to give them the satisfaction of my terror. The final test came one evening. As I sat in the diner, the front door swung open. A figure stood in the doorway. Not a silhouette this time, but a man. He looked ordinary, dressed in a simple suit. He smiled at me, a warm, friendly smile. "Enjoying your stay?" he asked, his voice the first I'd heard in what felt like a lifetime. "It's a lovely town," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos in my mind. He walked over and sat in the booth across from me. "We're so glad you like it. Most people don't adjust so well." His eyes were empty, devoid of any light. "We were thinking you might like to stay. Permanently become one of us." He gestured towards the window. "It's peaceful here." I knew this was it. The final move in the game. They weren't just feeding on fear anymore. They were offering me a place among them. An eternity of silent observation. Primera smiled back. A genuine smile this time, born of a desperate, wild idea. "That's a very kind offer," I said, "but I think I'm ready to leave now." The man's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. But no one leaves Hollow Creek. I stood up. "I'm not no one. I'm a visitor, and my visit is over." I turned and walked towards the door, every nerve ending screaming. I didn't look back. I expected a hand on my shoulder, a sudden change in the atmosphere. But nothing happened. I reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. I walked directly to my car. I didn't run. I got in, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. The engine roared to life. I looked at the gas station one last time. In the window, the man in the suit stood watching, his smile gone, replaced by a look of utter confusion. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the street. As I drove, the town began to change. The lights in the houses flickered and died. The buildings seemed to sag, the paint peeling away in an instant. The perfect lawns withered into brown patches. The town was decaying before my very eyes, its illusion crumbling now that its power over me was broken. I reached the edge of town and saw the sign again, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." But as I passed it, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The sign now read, "You're not welcome." The road ahead was the same endless stretch of asphalt I'd been on before. I checked my GPS. It flickered to life, showing my car on a clearly marked highway. Hollow Creek was gone, as if it had never existed. I drove for another hour before my phone chirped, a notification lighting up the screen. The static on the radio cleared, replaced by a song. It was over. I was free. But I know I'll never forget the suffocating silence of Hollow Creek and the faces in the windows forever watching. The building I worked in was nothing special, just another glass and steel box in the heart of the city. 12 floors high. Everyone knew it was 12 floors. The directory in the lobby listed companies from 1 to 12. The elevator panel had buttons from 1 to 12. Simple. I worked for a small marketing firm on the 7th floor. The hours were long, but the PE was decent, and I mostly kept to myself. This particular night was like many others. I was the last one to leave, wrapping up a presentation that was due first thing in the morning. The office was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the low hum of the servers and the clicking of my own keyboard. By the time I finally packed up my laptop and grabbed my coat, it was well past midnight. The city outside was a tapestry of distant sirens and the low rumble of late-night traffic. I walked down the dimly lit hallway, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the silence. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, leaving behind the faint, clean scent of disinfectant. I reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button. A moment later, a soft ding announced the arrival of a car. I stepped inside, the polished steel doors sliding shut behind me, sealing me in the small, sterile box. Alone. That was the first thing that always struck me about taking the elevator this late. During the day, it was a cramped, bustling space filled with hurried conversations and the smell of coffee. At night, it was just me and my reflection in the mirrored walls. I automatically reached out to press the G4, the ground floor. My finger hovered over the panel, and that's when I saw it. The panel was all wrong. The familiar layout was there. 1 through 12. The G4 ground. The P4 parking. The emergency call button. But nestled right between 12 and the emergency button was another one. A button that had never been there before. It was round, slightly worn, and bore a simple, stark number. 13. My heart did a little stutter step in my chest. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But it was still there. 30. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cool metal. It looked old, older than the other buttons. The plastic was slightly yellowed, the number etched into it with a font that didn't quite match the others. It wasn't lit up, just a dark, silent circle. A weird prank. Maybe some bored teenager had managed to pry off a button from another elevator and stick it on here. It was a stupid thought, but it was the only rational one I could come up with. I shook my head, a nervous laugh catching in my throat. I hadn't pressed it. I hadn't even touched it. My finger went back to its original target and firmly pressed. The button lit up with a reassuring green glow. The elevator gave a familiar lurch and began its descent. 7, 6, 5. The numbers above the door lit up in sequence, each one accompanied by a soft chime. Everything was normal. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. See, just tired. My mind was manufacturing strangeness out of sheer exhaustion. 4, 3, 2. I watched the numbers, willing the G to appear next, but it didn't. The elevator shuddered to a halt. The chime sounded, but the number that lit up above the door wasn't G, it was 13. A cold wave washed over me. I stared at the illuminated number, my mouth suddenly dry. No, that wasn't possible. I didn't press it. I know I didn't. The elevator shouldn't have stopped here. This floor doesn't exist. For a long moment, nothing happened. The elevator just sat there, humming quietly. I stood frozen, my knuckles white as I gripped the railing. Maybe it was a malfunction. A glitch in the system. The doors would stay shut, and it would eventually continue down to the ground floor. It at 2. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the doors began to slide open. It wasn't the smooth, swift motion I was used to. It was slow, agonizingly slow, as if they were being forced open against their will. A sliver of darkness appeared, widening inch by painful inch. A smell wafted in. A smell of dust and damp decay, of old paper and stale, stagnant air. The doors opened fully, revealing a hallway. But it wasn't a hallway from my building. The bright, modern aesthetic was gone. The walls here were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, a sickly yellow-green pattern that might have been fashionable half a century ago. Long, dark water stains ran down from the ceiling like weeping sores. The carpet underfoot was a threadbare, wine-colored monstrosity, worn down to the backing in several places. The lights, or what was left of them, were bare bulbs in rusted fixtures, most of them broken. The few that worked cast a weak, flickering jaundiced light that only seemed to deepen the shadows. It looked abandoned, condemned. My body was screaming at me to press the closed door button, to jab it over and over until the door sealed this nightmare away. But I couldn't move. My gaze was fixed on the end of the long, dilapidated hallway, because at the very end of it, there was a door. A single office door. And I recognized it. It was the same heavy oak door as my office on the 7th floor. The same frosted glass panel, and mounted on the wall beside it was a familiar brass plaque. I squinted, trying to make out the name engraved on it. It was my name. My blood ran cold. That was impossible. This wasn't the 7th floor. This was some forgotten, derelict space that shouldn't exist. Yet there it was. My name on a plaque next to my office door. My office door on the 13th floor, a floor I had never worked on. A floor that, until a few minutes ago, I didn't even know was here. My mind relayed trying to find a logical foothold. Was this a dream? A hallucination brought on by lack of sleep? I pinched my arm, hard. The sharp sting of pain was real. Frighteningly real. And then I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was coming from inside the office. My office. It was the sound of typing, not the rhythmic, steady clatter of someone working diligently. This was a frantic, desperate, almost violent sound, the furious clicking of keys being hammered, one after another, at an impossible speed. Click dash clack dash click dash clack dash clack dash clack dash click. It was a sound full of panic, of a race against an unseen clock. I stood there in the open elevator, a prisoner between two worlds, the clean, sterile safety of the elevator behind me, and the decaying, impossible reality of the 13th floor in front of me. Who was in there? Who was in my office, typing my name onto some document in the dead of night, on a floor that wasn't supposed to be real? The typing stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the noise it replaced. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. I held my breath, my ears straining, listening for any other sound. A coof, a chair creaking, anything. Slowly, I saw a shadow move behind the frosted glass of the office door. A dark, human-shaped silhouette. It rose from a chair, a tall, indistinct figure. It stood there for a moment, perfectly still, as if it knew I was watching, as if it had been waiting for me. Then, the shadow began to move towards the door. My paralysis finally broke. A jolt of pure animal terror shot through me. I lunged back into the elevator, my hands slapping wildly against the control panel, hitting every button I could find. Close door, G, 1, 2, anything. Close, 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 I whispered, my voice a ragged, choked sound. The shadow reached the door. The doorknob on the other side began to turn. With a final, blessed groan, the elevator doors started to slide shut. I saw the office door begin to open, a crack of deeper darkness appearing in the frame. Through the narrowing gap of the elevator doors, I caught a glimpse of something in that darkness. Not a face, just an impression of movement, of something pale and thin stepping out into the decaying hallway. The doors sealed shut, plunging me back into the bright, normal world of the elevator. The car lurched downwards, finally resuming its journey. I collapsed against the back wall, my legs giving out, gasping for air. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. 12, 11, 10. The numbers descended. The chimes sounded normal. Everything was normal again, but I knew it wasn't. Nothing would be normal again. The elevator dinged softly at the ground floor. The doors opened onto the familiar, brightly lit lobby. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his newspaper and gave me a casual wave. Working late again. ¿Qué de that? I couldn't answer. I just stumbled out of the elevator, past the guard, and pushed through the revolving doors into the cold night air. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran until the polished facade of the 12-story building was just another light among the countless others in the city skyline. I never went back. I quit my job the next morning via a short, frantic email. I didn't give a reason, and they didn't ask for one. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? They'd say I was crazy, that I'd overworked myself into a breakdown. But I know what I saw. I know about the 13th floor, and sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is quiet and the city has gone to sleep, I can still hear it. That frantic, desperate typing. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that somewhere up on that non-existent floor, in an office with my name on the door, someone, or something, is still working, waiting. And I think, maybe, they're typing my story. Finding the perfect house is tough, right? You scroll through listings for months, go to countless open houses, and deal with bidding wars. So when I stumbled upon this place, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It was in a decent neighborhood, had a nice little yard, and the price, well, the price was unbelievable. Almost too good to be true. I remember asking the real estate agent, "What's the catch?" She just smiled and said, "It's been on the market for a long time." She didn't elaborate. And honestly, I was so excited about the price, I didn't push it. I figured maybe the last owners had some financial trouble or there was a minor issue that scared off pickier buyers. For me, it was perfect. I signed the papers faster than you can say sold. The first day was a blur of unpacking boxers and ordering pizza. The house was a house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cozy living room, and a kitchen that needed a little love but had good bones. Everything was normal. I set up my bed, arranged my books on the shelves, and collapsed into sleep, dreaming of paint swatches and new furniture. The first night was silent, peaceful ebb. I woke up feeling refreshed, convinced I had made the best decision of my life. I spent the second day, much like the first, trying to carve out a home from the mountain of cardboard and bubble wrap. As evening fell, I made a simple dinner, watched a movie on my laptop, and felt a sense of contentment settle over me. This was it. This was my home. But then came the second night. It started subtly. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A faint sound, like a soft click, and a low groan. My first thought was the house settling. Old houses do that, right? They creak and groan. It's part of their charm. I rolled over and tried to ignore it. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. Click. Groan. It was a distinct sound, rhythmic and deliberate. It sounded like a door. A heavy wooden door opening slowly. But that was impossible. I lived alone. I had locked the front door and the back door myself. My bedroom door was wide open, and I could see down the hallway. There were no other doors. Curiosity, or maybe just a good dose of adrenaline, got the better of me. I slipped out of bed, my heart starting to pound a little faster. The floorboards were cold under my feet. I stood in the hallway, listening. Silence. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just overtired from the move. I was about to head back to bed when I heard it again, clearer this time. It was coming from the wall at the end of the hallway, the solid, windowless wall that separated the main hall from the side of the house. I took a few cautious steps forward, my hand trailing along the cool, textured wallpaper. There was nothing there, just a flat surface. I pressed my ear against it. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own breathing. Then, from the other side, I heard a faint, shuffling sound. My blood ran cold. I backed away slowly. My mind, racine. Was someone in the walls? It was a ridiculous thought, but the sound was undeniable. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every little creak and groan. The next day, I felt foolish. I was letting my imagination get away from me. It was an old house. Old houses make noises. I decided to investigate properly in the light of day. I went back to the hallway and examined every inch of that wall. I knocked on it, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. It was solid all the way across. I checked the blueprints I'd received during the sale. They showed a solid exterior wall, no hidden rooms, no secret passages, just a normal, boring wall. I felt a wave of relief. It had to be the pipes, or the wind, or some other perfectly logical explanation. I tried to put it out of my mind, focusing on making the house feel more like home. I hung pictures, bought a new rug for the living room, and even started painting the kitchen a cheerful yellow. For a few days, everything was normal. The nights were quiet. I started to relax, to feel safe again. I laughed at myself for being so jumpy, but on the 5th night, the sound returned. It was louder this time, a definite, unmistakable sound of a door swinging open on rusty hinges. It wasn't just a click and a groan anymore. It was a full-on creak that echoed down the hallway. It was coming from the exact same spot. This time, I wasn't scared. I was angry and determined. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I owned and marched down the hallway. I wasn't going to let some spooky noise chase me out of my own home. I stood in front of the wall, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and I dared it to make the sound again. And then, I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. Right in the middle of the wall, where there had been nothing but flat wallpaper before, was the faint but clear outline of a door. It was old, made of dark wood, with no handle or knob. It looked like it had been part of the house for 100 years. Yet I absolutely knew, it had not been there that morning. My hand trembled as I reached out and touched it. The wood was real, coarse, and splintered under my fingertips. I pushed against it, and to my utter shock, it swung inward with that same low, groaning sound I had been hearing all week. The air that flowed out was stale and musty, thick with the smell of dust and something else. Something old and sad. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness beyond. It revealed a small, windowless room. The space couldn't have been more than 6 feet by 6 feet. There was no furniture, no light fixture, nothing at all, except for the walls. Every single inch of the 4 walls, from the floor to the ceiling, was covered in writing. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam dancing across the surfaces. It was handwriting. Dozens of different styles of handwriting, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or pencil. There were dates, stretching back decades. 1954, 1978, and 1992, 2006. Next to the dates were names: John, Sarah, Michael, Emily. But it was the other text that made my stomach drop. A single sentence, written over and over and over again, filling every available space between the names and dates, in messy cursive, in neat block letters, in frantic scrawls. The sentence was always the same. This room only appears after you stay. A chilling realization washed over me. The agent's words echoed in my head. It's been on the market for a long time. Why? Because no one ever stayed long enough. They heard the sounds, they got scared, and they left before the door ever revealed itself. But I had stayed. I had pushed past the fear, and now I was here, standing in a room that shouldn't exist. A room that was a testament to everyone who had stayed before me. My eyes scanned the wall again, and I saw a fresh patch of bare plaster near the bottom. An empty space, waiting. My flashlight beam wavered as my hands started to shake uncontrollably. I felt a sudden, ice-cold draft on the back of my neck. Behind me, with a final, heavy slam that shook the very foundation of the house. The door closed by itself, plunging me into absolute, total darkness. The house was never listed for sale. No sign in the yard, no photos online, no history anyone could find, and yet, somehow, Daniel knew it was empty. It stood at the end of a narrow, forgotten road just outside the city, surrounded by tall grass and silent trees. It wasn't a forest, just land that felt completely abandoned. The windows were dark, like vacant eyes. The door was unlocked. That should have been his first and loudest warning. Daniel was a freelance videographer, and his niche was exploring abandoned places for long-form YouTube documentaries. He'd walked through the silent halls of old schools, the echoing corridors of empty hospitals, and countless houses that nobody wanted anymore. This one, however, was different. It arrived in his inbox anonymously. Just an address, no message, no context. Curiosity, as it so often does, got the better of him. When he stepped inside, the air was thick and stale, like the house had been holding its breath for years, just waiting for someone to arrive. The furniture was still there, coated in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise untouched. A couch in the living room, a dining table set for a meal that was never eaten, and family photos on the wall. But as Daniel looked closer, a cold unease trickled down his spine. Every single photo had something profoundly wrong with it. The faces, they were blurred, not scratched out, not damaged by time or water, just unfocused, as if the camera had never quite finished capturing their image, leaving them trapped in a state of perpetual ambiguity. Daniel Dever, the professional, set up his camera on a tripod near the entryway and began his standard walkthrough, narrating his initial impressions. As he moved through the downstairs hallway, he noticed something deeply unsettling about the layout. Every room felt positioned. It was as if the furniture wasn't placed for comfort or convenience, but for viewing. Chairs faced doorways instead of fireplaces. Beds were angled awkwardly toward dark corners. Mirrors were hung too low on some walls, and impossibly high on others. And none of them seemed to reflect him properly. Sometimes, his reflection would lag behind by a split second, a visual hiccup that his rational mind tried to dismiss. Old houses play tricks on you. That's what people say. That's what he told himself. Back in the living room, Daniel spotted a small, leather-bound notebook lying on the coffee table. It was already open to the last page, as if left for him. The ink was fresh. The last sentence, written in a stark, clear hand, read, "If you are reading this, it means the house is watching you too." A genuine chill, born not of cold but of a terrifying recognition, washed over him. The handwriting was neat, precise, and horrifyingly familiar. It looked exactly like his own. He quickly glanced at the display on his camera. The red light was on, the timer was ticking away. Everything was recording normally, but he had a sudden, dreadful urge to review the footage. He rewound the last few minutes, and his blood ran cold. The camera angle had changed. He distinctly remembered placing the tripod near the doorway, framing the entire living room. But in the footage he was now watching, the camera was positioned high up in the corner of the room, tilted downward. It was a perspective from something taller than him, something that must have moved his equipment without making a sound. And it wasn't just moved, its focus was different. The lens wasn't capturing the room. It was focused intently on Daniel, not following him as he moved, but observing him. Waiting as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the house grew louder, not with noise, but with presence. The silence became heavy, punctuated by sounds that had no source. Walls creaked where there was no weight. Floorboards groaned in empty rooms above. Doors that were once closed now stood slightly ajar, opening on their own never fully, just enough to feel deliberate, intentional, an invitation. Then Daniel heard it. Breathing. It wasn't behind him, or in the next room. It was above him. A slow, steady, rhythmic breath, seemingly coming from the ceiling itself. Panic finally broke through his professional calm. He grabbed his camera and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Every bedroom door on the second floor was now wide open, and inside each one was a camera. Old film cameras, modern DSLRs. Small web, an entire collection of different models, spanning decades. All of them were pointed toward the bed, and all of them were on. A constellation of little red lights blinked at him in the growing darkness. Recording, always recording. At the very end of the hallway, there was one final room. He pushed the door open to find it completely empty, except for one thing. A massive, ornate mirror covered the entire back wall, floor to ceiling. As Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest, he looked at his reflection, but it didn't match his movements. The Daniel in the mirror was standing perfectly still, his head slightly tilted, watching him. And then the reflection smiled, a wide, predatory smile that his own face was not making. Daniel screamed, a raw, primal sound that was swallowed by the house. He turned and bolted, scrambling down the stairs, fumbling for the front door. He grabbed the handle, turned it, and nothing. The mechanism clicked, but the door stayed shut, as if bolted from the other side. He pulled and pushed, his desperation growing with every failed attempt. Behind him, the house creaked again. A slow, calm, satisfied sound. 2 days later, a new video was uploaded to Daniel's YouTube channel. It had no title, no description, just a 3-hour-long static shot. The camera angle was the one from the corner of the living room, high up, looking down. It was pointed at the couch, and Daniel was sitting on it. He was unmoving, his posture rigid, staring directly into the camera lens, just breathing, watching, waiting. For 3 hours, nothing happened, but at exactly 2 hours, 47 minutes, and 12 seconds into the video, the on-screen Daniel blinked, slowly, and then he leaned forward, just enough for the microphone to pick up his whisper. "It sees you now." The video is still online. The house is still standing at the end of that forgotten road, and sometimes viewers who watch the full 3 hours swear that if they don't look away, the camera angle changes, hoosed slightly while they're watching. For over 50 years, the old brick building on Elm Street was the definition of ordinary. 4 floors, 12 apartments, and a single, narrow hallway that always smelled a little like dust and old paint. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, until the day it did. Until the day room 413 appeared. No one heard a single hammer swing. No one saw a construction crew. No permits were filed. It was just there. One Tuesday evening, a tenant named Evan got home from his late shift at the library. As he stepped onto the 4th floor, he felt a strange sense of unease. He walked towards his apartment, 414, and then froze. Between apartment 412 and the emergency stairwell, where there had only ever been a blank, cream-colored wall, there was now a door. It was made of a dark, almost black wood, with a grain that seemed to twist in unnatural patterns. There was no number plate, no peephole, not even a handle. Where a lock should have been, there was only a smooth, circular metal plate, the size of a silver dollar. Evan stood there for what felt like an hour, staring, trying to convince himself he was just tired, that his memory was playing tricks on him. Buildings don't just grow new rooms overnight. It was impossible. He shook his head, unlocked his own door across the hall, and tried to forget what he'd seen. The next morning, the hallway felt different. Tighter. Claustrophobic. It was a subtle change, but Evan could swear the walls had shifted inward by a few inches. He wasn't the only one. Mrs. Gable from 411 mentioned it to him as they passed. "Feels a bit snug in here today, doesn't it, dear?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. By the 3rd day, the entire floor was buzzing. The appearance of the door and the shrinking hallway were the only topics of conversation. A group of them decided to confront the building manager, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson. They brought him up to the 4th floor, pointing at the mysterious door. Mr. Henderson just frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you all talking about?" he sighed calmly. "There is no room 413. There never has been." They thought he was joking, or perhaps trying to cover something up. Evan pulled out his phone and showed him the picture he'd taken the night before, but as he looked at the screen, his blood ran cold. In the photo, the space between 412 and the stairwell was just a plain, empty wall. One by one, the other tenants checked their own photos. It was the same for all of them. The door existed when they looked at it with their own eyes, but it vanished from any picture or video they tried to take. It was a digital ghost. Mr. Henderson just shook his head and walked away, muttering about mass hysteria. That night, the sounds began. They were soft at first, barely audible over the hum of the building's old pipes. Faint sounds coming from behind the door of room 430. Breathing, A slow, rhythmic inhale, an exhale, then footsteps, a heavy, dragging sound, as if someone was pacing back and forth on an old wooden floor, and sometimes whispering, a constant, sibilant stream of whispers that sounded like 1,000 voices speaking at once, but in a language no one could recognize. Evan's apartment was directly across from the door, and for him, the sounds were inescapable. He tried stuffing pillows over his head, playing loud music, but the whispers seemed to seep through everything, and he noticed a terrifying pattern. Every single night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the whispering would abruptly stop. A dead silence would fall over the hallway for a few seconds, and then a new sound would begin. Scratching, long, slow, deliberate scratches coming from the inside of the door. It sounded like something was methodically dragging a sharp nail across the wood, over and over again, as if it was trying to learn the shape of the door, to map out its own prison. A week passed. The hallway grew even narrower, now barely wide enough for one person to walk down without their shoulders brushing the walls. Sleep was a forgotten luxury for the residents of the 4th floor. One night, as Evan was staring at the door, trying to summon the courage to just pack a bag and leave, he noticed something that made his stomach drop: the circular metal plate on the door. It had changed. A tiny, almost imperceptible indentation had appeared on its surface. It was faint, but unmistakable. It looked like the beginning of a fingerprint, slowly being pressed into the metal from the inside. That was the last straw for many. People started moving out. T. Couple in 410 were the first to go. They packed in a hurry, their faces pale and drawn. But something strange happened. No one who left could ever explain why they were leaving. When asked, they'd just mumble something about needing a change of scenery. Then they would walk out the front door and disappear. Their friends and family would call, but the calls would go straight to voicemail. Their social media would go silent. Their apartments were found just as they'd left them, perfectly neat. Keys still on the counter, phones lying on the table, as if they had simply stepped out of existence the moment they crossed the building's threshold. Evan knew he had to get out. He couldn't end up like the others. He spent the entire day packing his most essential belongings into a single suitcase. He didn't dare sleep. He just sat on his sofa, staring at his front door, waiting for the sun to rise. He would leave at first light and never look back. The first rays of dawn finally broke through his window. It was time. With a deep breath, he grabbed his suitcase, walked to his door, and turned the handle. He pulled it open, ready to step into the familiar, shrinking hallway. But he wasn't in the hallway. He was standing inside room 413. The door behind him slammed shut and vanished, melting back into a solid, featureless wall. Panic seized him. The room was impossible. It was larger than the entire building. A vast, cavernous space that stretched into an infinite, shadowy distance. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and decay. The walls were lined with endless rows of doors, stretching as far as the eye could see. Each door was identical to the one that had appeared in the hallway. Dark wood with a single metal plate, but these doors had something else. Scratched crudely into the wood of each one was a name. His heart pounded as he read them. Mrs. Gable, the couple from 410. Every single person who had ever lived in the building, their names were all there. Some of the doors were slightly ajar. Driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't control, Evan peered inside. Once he saw a moment frozen in time. Mrs. Gable, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a terror he couldn't comprehend. He looked into another. It was the man from 410, forever reaching for a phone that would never ring. In a third, he saw a child who used to live on the 2nd floor, staring directly at him from her frozen world. And then, impossibly, she blinked. He stumbled back, horrified, and turned towards the center of the vast room. Standing there, all alone, was a single, ornate, full-length mirror. Its silver frame was tarnished and ancient. Shaking, Evan approached it, his own footsteps echoing in the terrifying silence. He needed to see something real, something familiar. Even if it was just his own reflection, he looked into the glass. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't moving with him. As he stood there, frozen in terror, his reflection slowly, deliberately, began to smile. Weeks later, after Evan was reported missing, the police conducted a final search of the apartment building. They found nothing out of the ordinary on the 4th floor. The hallway was back to its normal width. The space between apartment 412 and the emergency stairwell was just a blank wall. Room 413 was gone. The case was closed. Another unexplained disappearance. But the new tenant who moved into apartment 412 often complained about a strange mark on her wall. A faint but clear outline, the shape of a door. And if you looked closely, in just the right light, you could see something scratched deeply into the paint right in the center. A name and a word. Evan occupant. Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine? Not from the cold, but from something else, a feeling that you're being watched, even when you're completely alone? Our story tonight begins on just such an evening, under a sky heavy with snow. Imagine a world blanketed in white, every sound muffled by the falling flakes. The trees stand like silent, skeletal sentinels, their branches laden with snow. In a small town nestled on the edge of a vast, ancient forest, a woman named Elara was looking out her window, watching the storm swirl. The world outside was a beautiful, but desolate, monochrome painting. But then, she saw it, a splash of color against the white, a small figure, standing just at the edge of the woods, between two towering pine trees. It was a child, wearing a bright red coat. They were perfectly still, a tiny, vibrant statue in the swirling snow. Alara's heart clenched. What was a child doing out there? All alone, in this weather. It was late. The temperature was plummeting, and the forest was no place for anyone after dark, let alone a little one. Every local knew the stories, the whispers of those who had wandered into the woods and never returned. Concern quickly overrode her initial unease. She pulled on a heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and grabbed a powerful flashlight. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow as she stepped outside, the cold air biting at her cheeks. "Hello," she called out, her voice absorbed by the snow-filled air. "Are you all right?" There was no response. The child didn't move, didn't even seem to shiver. They just stood there, a silent beacon in the gloom. Elara walked faster, her flashlight beam cutting a path through the falling snow, illuminating the still figure. As she got closer, she could see it was a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dark, fixed on something deep within the forest. "Hey there," she said softly, trying not to startle him. "It's too cold to be out here. Where are your parents? Are you lost?" The boy remained silent. He didn't look at her. Instead, he slowly raised a small, gloved hand and pointed not towards the town, not towards a house, but deeper into the impenetrable darkness of the woods. Elara hesitated. A knot of dread began to form in her stomach. Everything about this felt wrong. The child's unnatural stillness, his silence, the direction he was pointing. The forest had always held a certain mystique, a place of folklore and cautionary tales. Legends spoke of strange lights, of voices on the wind, of people who walked in and simply vanished from the earth. But the sight of the small, vulnerable child overrode her fear, and needed help. She couldn't just leave him here. "Okay," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Is someone in there? Is that where your family is?" The boy gave a single, slow nod. His gaze never wavered from the darkness he was pointing to. Elara took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She took a step past the boy, towards the tree line, shining her light into the dense woods. The beam caught on the thick trunks of ancient trees, creating dancing, elongated shadows. It was like looking into a black, gaping mouth. "I don't see anyone," she said, turning back to the boy. "Are you sure?" He nodded again. His persistence was unsettling. Why wasn't he talking? Why wasn't he cold? Her rational mind was screaming at her, telling her to grab the boy and run back to the warmth and safety of her home. But an inexplicable pull, a sense of duty mixed with a terrifying curiosity, kept her there. She decided to take a few more steps into the woods. Who's to be sewer? I'll just take a quick look, she told the silent child, as if reassuring herself. You stay right here. As she moved forward, something made her glance down at the ground. And that's when the real horror began. The snow was deep, a fresh, undisturbed blanket. Her own footprints were clear, dark indentations in the pristine white. But around the boy, there was nothing. Not a single mark. He was standing on top of the snow, leaving no trace of his presence. It was impossible. He should have sunk in, just like she had. A wave of pure ice-cold terror washed over her. This wasn't a lost child. This was something else entirely. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand holding the flashlight trembled, the beam dancing erratically across the snow, confirming what her eyes had seen. Nothing. No footprints. She slowly backed away, her eyes locked on the boy, who still hadn't moved. Who are you? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The wind howled through the trees, a mournful, eerie sound. The boy finally turned his head, his dark, empty eyes meeting hers for the first time. The air grew impossibly cold. And then he spoke. His voice was not the voice of a child. It was a faint, ethereal whisper that seemed to come from all around her, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was a voice she recognized, a distorted echo of her own. I am you, the whisper said. The words hung in the frozen air, sharp and clear despite their softness. Ilara's mind struggled to comprehend. It made no sense. I am you, the whisper repeated. But you never leave the forest. The meaning of those words slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. A forgotten memory, a childhood game of hide-and-seek in this very forest. A moment of fear, a wrong turn. But she had made it out. Adnte she, the story her parents always told, how they found her crying at the edge of the woods just before sunset. Was that the real story? The boy's face, which had seemed pale and indistinct, now sharpened into a hauntingly familiar image. It was her face from an old, faded photograph on her parents' mantelpiece. Her at 7 years old. The red coat, she'd had a red coat just like that. Her reality began to fray at the edges. Was this a dream? A hallucination brought on by the cold? She blinked, trying to clear her head, to force the world back into focus. It was just a moment, a single, desperate blink against the terrifying vision before her. And in that instant, he was gone. The space where the boy in the red coat had stood was now empty. There was no sound, no flash of light, just an abrupt absence. He had vanished as silently and mysteriously as he had appeared. Ilara stood frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the empty spot, the impossible, footprintless patch of snow. The whisper echoed in her mind. You never leave Theforest. A cold dread, deeper and more profound than any she had ever known, seeped into her bones. Was it a warning or a statement of fact? She looked back towards her house, its warm lights twinkling through the snow. It seemed a million miles away. Then she looked back into the dark, waiting forest. The place she had supposedly escaped all those years ago. The pointing hand, the silent guide, the whispered truth. It was a summons. She took one step, then another. The flashlight fell from her numb fingers. Its beam extinguished as it hit the soft snow. She walked towards the tree line, leaving her own set of footprints behind, moving towards the darkness that had waited for her for so long. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world was bright, silent, and clean. But Ilara was gone. Her neighbors noticed her house was dark, her car still in the driveway. They called her name, but only silence answered. When the search party was organized, they followed her footprints from her front door. They led directly to the edge of the ancient forest. And there, the trail stopped. But next to her last, deep footprint, they found something else. Something that made no sense. In the undisturbed snow, there was a single set of small footprints. A child's footprints. They didn't lead from anywhere. They simply began, took a few steps into the deep, dark woods, and then they too vanished, as if the person who made them had simply dissolved into the air, finally returning home. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're completely alone? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck? The sudden urge to look over your shoulder? For most of us, it's just our imagination playing tricks. But for one professional photographer, that feeling became a terrifying reality, captured forever on his camera. This is a story that blurs the line between the seen and the unseen. A tale that will make you question what really lurks in the shadows just beyond our sight. Our story begins with a man named Alex, a seasoned nature photographer with a passion for capturing the untouched beauty of the wilderness. He had an eye for the dramatic, the kind of shots that most people would never think to take. One frigid winter night, a fresh blanket of snow covered the landscape, shimmering under a full moon. For Alex, this was the perfect opportunity. He wanted to capture the ethereal, silent beauty of a snow-laden forest at night. Packing his high-end camera gear, he drove out to the edge of a dense, old-growth forest, a place known for its quiet solitude. He ventured into the woods. The only sound, the soft crunch of his boots on the pristine snow. The air was still and incredibly cold, the kind of cold that seeps deep into your bones. He found a small clearing where the moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the snow-covered branches like a scene from a fairy tale. He set up his tripod, his breath fogging in the icy air, and began to film. He was completely absorbed in his work, adjusting the focus, panning slowly across the silent trees, trying to capture the perfect, hauntingly beautiful shot. As he worked, a strange feeling began to creep over him. It started as a subtle chill, one that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. It was a sense of unease, a feeling that the silence of the forest wasn't empty. It felt watchful. He tried to shake it off, attributing it to the isolation in the late hour. He was a rational man, not one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions. He continued filming, panning his camera back and forth, capturing long takes of the serene, snowy landscape. He packed up his gear after about an hour, satisfied with the footage he'd collected and eager to get back to the warmth of his home. He never looked back. He never saw anything out of the ordinary. The forest remained as silent and still as when he arrived. The only footprints in the snow were his own. Back in his studio, a warm cup of coffee in hand, Alex began the exciting process of reviewing his footage. He transferred the files to his computer, eager to see the fruits of his cold night's work. The first few clips were exactly as he'd hoped. Stunning, high-definition shots of the moonlit snow. The silence of the forest was palpable, even through the screen. It was peaceful, almost meditative. He smiled to himself, already thinking about how he would edit these clips into a beautiful montage. But then, as he watched one of the longer panning shots, something caught his eye. It was a flicker, a subtle anomaly in the background. He paused the video and rewound it. His curiosity piqued. He played it again, his eyes glued to the screen. There, deep among the trees, partially obscured by the shadows and branches, was a shape. It was tall and slender, almost indistinguishable from the tree trunks around it. He squinted, leaning closer to the monitor. It looked human. His heart began to beat a little faster. He was certain he had been alone. He had seen no one, heard no one. He scrubbed through the footage frame by frame. In the next shot, a pan to the right, the figure was still there, but it had moved. It was now standing behind a different tree, slightly closer to his position. A cold dread began to wash over him. This wasn't a trick of the light. He quickly opened another video file, one he had taken a few minutes later. He scanned the background, his hands trembling slightly, and he found it again. Or rather, he found asterisk them. Now there were two figures. They stood motionless, like statues in the snow, their forms blending almost perfectly with the dark woods. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had spent an hour in that clearing, completely oblivious, while these sick watched him from the darkness. The initial discovery was unsettling, but what followed was pure terror. Driven by a morbid need to understand what he had captured, Alex decided to analyze every second of his footage. He sat in his darkened studio, the only light coming from the glowing screen, and began a painstaking, frame-by-frame review. He told himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was other hikers or pranksters trying to scare him. But the more he watched, the more that rational hope evaporated. As he advanced the timeline, clip by clip, the figures' positions changed. They never seemed to move in real time. In one frame, a figure would be behind a distant oak tree. A few seconds of footage later, in a completely different shot, it would be several yards closer, partially hidden by a cluster of ferns. Their movements weren't fluid. They were instantaneous, as if they were teleporting from one shadow to the next between his camera's pans. It was unnatural, jerky, and utterly terrifying. The high resolution of his camera, which he had been so proud of, now became a source of horror. As the figures inched closer with each subsequent clip, their features became disturbingly clear. They were humanoid, with long limbs and pale, almost luminous skin that contrasted sharply with the dark forest. Their faces were the worst part. They were gaunt and elongated, with large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb all light. They had no discernible expressions at first, just a blank, vacant stillness that was more unsettling than any overt threat. Alex felt sick. His studio, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He was watching a recording of his own, Near Mies, a silent horror movie, where he was the unwitting star. He kept watching, unable to tear his eyes away. He had to see how it ended. The final piece of footage was a static shot he had set up, pointing directly back towards the path he had taken into the clearing. He had let the camera run for about 5 minutes before packing up. He fast-forwarded through the clip, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first 4 minutes, nothing. Just the silent, empty path. Then, in the final minute, one of the figures appeared. It didn't walk into the frame. It simply materialized. One moment, the path was empty. The next, it was there, standing directly in the center of the shot. It was closer than ever before, filling a significant portion of the screen. And this time, it wasn't just standing there. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and it was looking directly into the camera lens. Directly at asterisk. Asterisk. As the footage played out in its final seconds, a slow, deliberate smile spread across its impossibly wide mouth. It was a smile of pure malice, a predatory grin that promised unspeakable things. The video ended abruptly as he had shut the camera off, leaving the horrifying image burned into his mind. The smiling face haunted him. It was the last thing he saw when he closed his eyes. Sleep offered no escape, only nightmares filled with silent figures and dark, endless forests. Alex knew he couldn't just let this go. He was a photographer, a documentarian. His instincts screamed at him to go back, to get more proof, to understand what he had stumbled upon. He felt a bizarre, almost insane compulsion to confront this terror. A few days later, armed with multiple cameras and a heavy-duty flashlight, he drove back to the forest. It was daytime now, and he hoped the sunlight would strip away the fear, revealing the woods to be nothing more than trees and snow. But as he approached the familiar trailhead, a sense of deep foreboding settled over him. The forest felt different. The air was heavy, oppressive. He started down the path he had taken before, but things were wrong. The landscape seemed to shift and warp around him. A familiar, large boulder he remembered passing was gone. A stream he'd crossed was now on the wrong side of the trail. It felt like the forest itself was actively trying to confuse him, to turn him around. He pushed on, convinced his memory was just clouded by fear. But after walking for what felt like an hour, he found himself standing right back at the entrance of the trail, next to his parked car. He tried again and again. Each time, the path would seem to twist and fold in on itself, leading him in circles, always depositing him back where he started. It was impossible, a complete defiance of logic and space. He was a skilled outdoorsman. He knew how to navigate, but this was something else, entirely. It was as if the forest was rejecting him, protecting its secret. The realization dawned on him with sickening clarity. He wasn't welcome here anymore. Defeated and more terrified than ever, he returned home. The feeling of being watched, which had started in the forest, didn't stay there. It followed him. He would catch fleeting glimpses of tall, slender figures in the reflection of a window, or see a pale face in a crowd for just a second before it vanished. The shadows in his own home seemed to lengthen and deepen, playing tricks on his eyes. He began to understand the horrifying truth. His camera hadn't just captured images that night. By focusing his lens on them, by observing them, he had somehow acknowledged their existence. He had made a connection. He had awakened something ancient and malevolent, and in doing so, he had invited it into his life. The forest was their world, but now they were beginning to cross into his... The final, smiling image from his footage was not an ending. It was a beginning. A promise. The haunting hadn't ended in the forest. It had only just begun, and now he was the one being filmed. The night was cold. So cold that the air seemed to bite at any exposed skin. Lucas was driving, his hands clenched tight on the steering wheel, the only warmth coming from the car's heater blasting on full. He was on a remote forest road, one he'd never taken before. A shortcut recommended by his GPS that was now seeming more like a long, dark detour. Snow was falling, not heavily, but enough to dust the world in a fine, white powder. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic crunch. Crunch. Crunch of his tires on the fresh snow. He'd been driving for what felt like hours. The endless wall of dark trees on either side of the road starting to feel oppressive. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, 11:47 p.m. He should have been home an hour ago. He let out a sigh, his breath fogging up the cold glass of the windshield for a moment. Up ahead, his headlights caught something. It was a signpost, old and weathered, leaning slightly to one side. The letters were faded, but he could just make out the name of a town he didn't recognize. Silent Creek. An odd name, he thought. He drove past it, the sign disappearing into the darkness behind him. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the road, trying to ignore the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. About 10 minutes later, maybe 12, his heart gave a sudden, hard thump against his ribs. There, caught in the beam of his headlights, was the signpost again. Silent Creek. He slowed the car, leaning forward, squinting. It was identical. The same layout, the same faded letters, the same patch of moss clinging to the bottom. It couldn't be. He must have somehow turned around without realizing it, maybe taken a wrong turn in the dark. But the road was straight. There were no turnoffs, no forks in the road. It was just one continuous stretch of asphalt cutting through the woods. He shook his head, trying to rationalize it. It's late, he told himself. I'm tired. It's just a similar-looking sign. The county probably uses the same design for all its signs in this area. That had to be it. He pressed his foot on the accelerator, a little harder this time, wanting to put as much distance as possible between himself and that strange sign. The trees flew by in a blur of black and white. He kept his eyes glued to the road ahead, refusing to look in his rearview mirror. He just wanted this drive to be over. A few minutes later, his blood ran cold. The signpost. It was there again. Up ahead, waiting for him. Silent Creek. This time, there was no denying it. It was the same one. The exact same one. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't possible. It defied all logic. He was trapped. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt in the middle of the empty road. Snow kicking up around the tires. He sat there, his heart pounding in his ears, the silence of the forest suddenly deafening. The world outside his car seemed to be holding its breath. He was caught in a loop, a repeating nightmare on a road that led nowhere. He had to get out. That was his only thought. He spun the wheel, making a frantic three-point turn, the tires squealing in protest against the asphalt. He was going back the way he came. He didn't care if it added hours to his journey. He just needed to escape this cursed road. Flore did his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He passed the signpost one more time, this time from the other direction. a silent sentinel watching him flee. He drove and drove, faster and faster, the speedometer needle climbing. He passed a distinctive, lightning-scarred oak tree. He passed a small, dilapidated wooden bridge over a frozen creek. These were landmarks he remembered from his drive-in. Good, he thought. I'm making progress. I'm getting out. But then he saw the bridge again. The same dilapidated planks, the same frozen creek beneath it. His hope evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He hadn't escaped. The loop wasn't just in one direction. It was the entire road. He was driving in circles. Even when he was driving in a straight line, the lightning-scarred oak appeared again, a ghostly shape in the swirling snow. Then the signpost for Silent Creek loomed ahead once more. He was right back where he started. A desperate, choked sob escaped his lips. He was a rat in a maze with no exit. He kept driving, almost on autopilot now, a numb terror settling over him. He passed the landmarks in their maddeningly predictable sequence. Sin, bridge, tree. Sin, bridge, tree. Ober and Ober. The forest, which had once just been a dark backdrop, now felt alive, watching him, toying with him. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for his car. The repetition was starting to mess with his head. Was he going insane? Was this all just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Then Isol, Italiano, pulled over on the shoulder of the road. Just ahead was a car, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just any car. It was his car. The same model, the same color, the same small dent on the rear bumper from a runaway shopping cart last month. It was an exact replica, parked silently in the falling snow. His mind recoiled. This couldn't be real. It was a dream. It had to be a dream. He slowed his own car to a crawl, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. As he drew alongside the parked vehicle, he peered through the driver's side window, and then he saw him. Sitting in the driver's seat was a man. The man looked just like him, an identical twin, dressed in the same clothes, with the same haircut, the same tired expression etched onto his face. But there was something wrong. The man's head was slumped forward, his eyes open but vacant, staring lifelessly ahead at the windshield. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He was a perfect, still copy of Lucas, a doppelganger. A corpse. A scream tore from Lucas's throat. He stomped on the accelerator, his car lurching forward, leaving the horrifying tableau behind. He didn't dare look back. A hustrab his mind, a whirlwind of terror and confusion. Who was that? What was that? Was that his future? A premonition of his own death on this endless, looping road. The questions hammered at him, but there were no answers. There was only the road, the snow, and the suffocating forest. Panic gave him a new, desperate energy. He had to escape. He swerved the car, turning off the road and plunging directly into the trees. Branches scraped and screeched against the metal, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. He bounced over unseen roots and rocks, the car groaning in protest. He didn't care about the damage. He just had to break the pattern, to get off the road that held him captive. The forest was dense, a maze of black trunks and tangled undergrowth. He drove blindly, turning left, then right, trying to find a way through. But it was no use. After a few minutes of crashing through the wilderness, he broke through a line of trees, and his tires hit smooth asphalt. He was back on the road, and there, just a few yards ahead, was the signpost, Silent Creek. The forest had spit him back out. It wouldn't let him leave. The road was its domain, and he was its prisoner. He tried again and again, veering into the woods at different points, always with the same result. The forest was infinite, a labyrinth that always led back to the same cursed stretch of pavement. He finally gave up, slumping over the wheel in utter defeat. The car idled in the middle of the road, the engine a lonely sound in the vast, silent night. He had no more fight left in him. He had accepted his fate. This was his reality now. The loop, the car, the doppelganger. As he sat there, lost in his despair, he did another lap. He passed the bridge, the tree, and then he saw it again, the parked car. His other car, Bat. This time something was different. The driver's side door of the other car was open. The seat was empty. The lifeless doppelganger was gone. Lucas's eyes darted around, scanning the dark woods. Where did it go? A flicker of movement at the edge of the trees caught his eye. A figure, silhouetted against the snow, was stepping out from behind a large pine. It was him, the other him. It stood there for a moment, its form hazy in the falling snow, and then it turned and simply walked away, disappearing into the blackness of the forest. And in that moment, a horrifying, final realization dawned on Lucas. A truth so cold it froze the very marrow in his bones. The forest doesn't just trap you, it replaces you. That thing, that copy of him, was now free. It had taken his place in the world outside, while he was left here, in the loop. He looked down at his own hands on the steering wheel. Were they really his? He looked at his reflection in the dark rearview mirror. Was that really him? He understood now. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The road needed a placeholder. The forest demanded a sacrifice. Soon, another lost traveler would drive down this road. They would see him, parked on the shoulder, a lifeless figure in the driver's seat, and the cycle would continue. The road never ends. The forest never lets you leave. He slowly pulled his car over to the shoulder, parking it in the exact same spot where the other one had been. He turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. He stared ahead at the empty road, waiting. He didn't know for how long. Forever, maybe. In the heart of an old, sprawling forest, there lies a secret. It's a lake, but not just any lake. In the dead of winter, it freezes over, its surface becoming a perfect, unbroken sheet of glass. It looks inviting, almost magical, under the pale moonlight. But the locals, the ones who have lived in the shadow of these ancient trees for generations, they tell a different story. They warn you with a seriousness in their eyes that sends a shiver down your spine. Never to walk on the ice. They say strange things happen when the freeze is deep, and the silence of the forest is absolute. They speak of it in hushed tones, as if the lake itself is listening. Of course, warnings are often seen as challenges, aren't they? And so it was one frigid winter night. A group of hikers, young and full of that reckless confidence that youth provides, found themselves at the edge of the frozen expanse. They were seasoned explorers, or so they thought. They'd conquered mountains and navigated dense woods. But this was different. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing in on them. Intrigued by the local legends and the eerie, almost supernatural calm of the place, they decided to see for themselves. One by one, they stepped onto the ice, their boots crunching softly, the sound swallowed by the immense quiet. At first, it was just the thrill of defying the warnings. The ice held firm beneath their feet, a solid foundation in the middle of the wilderness. They laughed, their breath pluming in the frosty air, the sound strangely muffled. But then it began. A faint tapping, a subtle scratching sound from deep beneath the surface. It was easy to dismiss at first, just the natural shifting of the ice, the water moving below. That's what they told each other, trying to rationalize the unsettling noise. But the sounds didn't stop. They grew more distinct. The tapping became more rhythmic, the scratching more insistent, like fingernails dragging along the underside of the ice. And then the whispers started. It was faint, a barely audible murmur carried on the wind. But this wasn't the wind. The whispers were coming from below. From the ice itself. At first, they were jumbled, incoherent. But as the hikers stood frozen in place, listening, the sounds began to form words, and the words formed names. Their names, one by one. A cold, dry voice would call out from the depths. Michael, it would hiss. And Michael would jump, his face pale. Sarah, it would rasp. And Sarah would clutch her friend's arm. The voices grew louder, more personal, as if something down there knew them, had been waiting for them. The sounds seemed to be right under their feet, moving with them as they took hesitant, terrified steps. The group huddled together, their earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a primal fear. The whispers were all around them now, a chorus of chilling invitations from the abyss. They were no longer just hearing their names. The voices were promising things, speaking of secrets, whispering temptations tailored to each hiker's deepest desires. The cold was no longer just in the air. It was seeping into their bones, a psychological chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The smooth surface of the lake no longer seemed beautiful. It was a terrifying barrier between them and whatever was calling from the dark. Panic began to set in. One of the hikers, a man named Leo, couldn't take it anymore. He was convinced it was a trick, some natural phenomenon they were misinterpreting, driven by a desperate need to prove it, to silence the voices that were now screaming his name. He did the unthinkable. He started stomping on the ice, his heavy boots slamming against the frozen surface again and again. His friends screamed at him to stop, but he was beyond reason. He needed to see. He needed to know what was making those sounds. With a sickening crack that echoed across the silent forest, the ice gave way beneath him, but he didn't fall into the freezing water as everyone expected. There was no splash, no gasp for air. He just disappeared. His friends rushed to the edge of the hole he'd created, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They peered down, expecting to see the murky, black water of the lake. But there was no water. There was nothing. They were staring into a bottomless, silent void. It was a darkness so absolute, so complete, that it seemed to swallow the beams of their lights. There was no reflection, no sound, just an endless, terrifying emptiness. The whispers stopped. The silence that returned was 1,000 times more horrifying than the voices had been. The remaining hikers scrambled back to shore, their minds reeling with what they had just witnessed. They ran through the forest, not daring to look back. The image of that impossible abyss burned into their minds. When the sun rose the next morning, casting its gentle light over the forest, a search party went out. They found the campsite, the remnants of a fire, the gear left behind in a hurry. But of the hikers, there was no trace. They walked to the edge of the lake and looked out. The ice was perfectly smooth, completely intact, as if no one had ever stepped on it. There was no hole, no cracks, not a single sign of the previous night's horror. The lake lay silent and still, its glass-like surface reflecting the winter sky, patiently waiting for the next curious soul to test its ancient warnings. The forest floor was a blanket of white, each snowflake a silent witness to the stillness of the woods. I'd been walking for hours. The crunch of my boots, the only sound breaking the profound quiet. It was then that I saw it, a dark shape against the snow, just peeking out from under a drift near the base of an ancient oak. Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down, my gloved fingers brushing away the cold powder. It was a book, an old leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and weathered by time and the elements. The moment I picked it up, a strange feeling washed over me, a mix of intrigue and a deep, primal unease. The leather was cold and stiff in my hands. A faint, earthy smell rose from its pages, a scent of damp wood, decaying leaves, and something else. Something ancient? I hesitated for a moment, a voice in the back of my mind screaming at me to drop it, to walk away and forget I ever saw it. But I couldn't. The journal felt like it had been waiting for me. I unlatched the rusty clasp and carefully opened the cover. The first page was filled with elegant, looping script, written in a faded brown ink. It was a name, Elias Thorpe, and a date, October 17th, 1884. Below it, a short paragraph detailed how Elias, a local trapper, had ventured into these very woods to check his lines and was never seen again. I turned the page. Another name, another date, another story of a person swallowed by the forest. Sarah Miller, a young botanist who came searching for rare flowers in the spring of 1923. The Peterson family, who went for a picnic in the summer of 1956 and vanished without a trace. Their car left abandoned on the old logging road. Each entry was meticulously detailed, describing the person, the date they entered the woods, and the simple, chilling fact that they were never heard from again. The journal was a ledger of the lost, a grim catalogue of souls claimed by this silent, sprawling wilderness. As I continued to flip through the brittle pages, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The handwriting started to change, becoming less ornate, more rushed. The ink, too, looked different, darker, fresher. The dates were getting closer to the present: 1987, 1999, 2011. It was as if the journal wasn't just a historical record. It felt alive, like it was being actively updated. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't some long-lost artifact. This was something else entirely. The last entry I read was dated just last year. A hiker, Naimendal, who had posted his route on a local hiking forum. The journal entry quoted his post verbatim before stating he never made it back to his car. My hands were trembling now. I reached the end of the written entries. Ahead were dozens of blank, yellowed pages. But as I flipped to the very last page, I saw something. It was completely blank, but there was a faint indentation, as if something had been recently written and then erased. I squinted, trying to make it out in the fading afternoon light, but it was no use. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping fast. I knew I needed to start heading back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this journal held a secret I was meant to uncover. I packed the journal into my bag, a heavy weight, both literally and figuratively. As I retraced my steps, the forest seemed different. The familiar trees now looked like twisted, skeletal figures. Shadows danced in my peripheral vision, and every snap of a twig made me jump. The sun disappeared completely, plunging the woods into a deep, inky blackness. I pulled out my headlamp, its beam cutting a lonely path through the oppressive dark. Above, the full moon began to rise, its ethereal glow filtering through the canopy. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, the cold air burning my lungs. For some reason, I felt compelled to look at the journal one more time. I pulled it from my bag and opened it again to that final blank page. This time, as the pale moonlight washed over the paper, I saw it. Faint letters, like ghosts on the page, began to shimmer into view. They formed a sentence, a chilling, personal message. My blood ran cold. The words read, "The next one is you." It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. A cold, terrifying dread seized me, far colder than the winter air. My breath hitched in my throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, my mind playing games on me in the darkness. But the words were there, undeniable and clear. I screamed, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the vast emptiness of the forest. I dropped the journal as if it were on fire, the book landing with a soft thud in the snow. My only instinct was to run. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, not caring about the path, just trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed book. Branches whipped at my face, roots snaked out to trip my feet, but I kept going, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. But the forest seemed to conspire against me. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to block my way. The familiar trail I had followed was gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of thorns and thickets. It felt like the woods were alive, closing in, trapping me. Panic gave way to exhaustion. My legs, borne at my lungs, screamed for air. I stumbled and fell, collapsing into the snow. Defeated, I lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart. The forest was silent again, but it was no longer a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a predator watching its prey. Eventually, the first light of dawn began to seep through the trees, chasing away the deepest shadows. I pushed myself up, my body aching and covered in scratches. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion. Had it all been a nightmare? I managed to find my way back to the spot where I had dropped the journal, and there it was, lying open in the snow, exactly where I had left it. A part of me wanted to leave it, to run and never look back. But I had to know. With a shaking hand, I reached down and picked it up. I turned to the last page, the one that had held the ghostly message in the moonlight. The page was no longer blank. In bold, dark ink that looked unnervingly fresh were two new lines of text. The first was my name, and below it, the date. Yesterday's date. The day I had entered the forest, the journal had claimed another soul, and this time it was mine. The forest had always been Ilias's sanctuary, a place where the crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound that mattered. But this winter, something was different. A cold deeper than the frost clung to the air, and the tall, skeletal trees seemed to watch him with a silent, ancient malice. He'd been walking for what felt like hours, the sun a pale, distant coin in the gray sky, when he first noticed it. His shadow. It wasn't behaving as it should. It took a step, and his shadow, a dark stain against the pristine snow, remained still. He stopped, holding his breath, and the shadow took a slow, deliberate step of its own. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold, traced a path down his spine. He dismissed it at first. A trick of the light? Perhaps the low winter sun, playing games with the uneven ground. He was a man of logic, a teacher in the small village nestled at the forest's edge. He believed in what he could see, what he could touch. But the feeling of unease was a stubborn weed, taking root in his mind. He continued his walk, trying to focus on the rhythmic sound of his boots, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth. Yet, his eyes kept darting to the ground. Every time he moved, his shadow would either lag behind, stay frozen in place, or worse, twitch with a life that wasn't his. It was a macabre dance, a puppet show where he was no longer the one pulling the strings. The forest around him seemed to darken in response, the air growing heavier, colder. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. He stopped again, this time with a growing sense of dread. He stood perfectly still, a statue of wool and flesh. But his shadow, it didn't stop. It detached from his feet and kept walking. It stretched, elongating like warm taffy, its limbs twisting into impossible, nightmarish angles. It moved with a grotesque fluidity, a dark, silent creature born from his own form. Ilias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was not a trick of the light. This was wrong. His hand, trembling, reached out to touch the dark shape moving independently on the snow. He expected to feel the cold, grainy texture of the ground, but his fingers met only air. He swiped through the space where the shadow's head should be, and there was nothing. A void. A cold, empty nothingness that defied all logic. His hand passed through it as if it were smoke, yet the shadow was undeniably there, a solid patch of blackness against the white. Then, the shadow stopped. It turned. The featureless head tilted, a gesture of curiosity that was profoundly, bone-chillingly human. It was looking at him. Elias was certain of it. A shape of pure darkness, without eyes or a face, was observing him with an intelligence that felt ancient and malevolent. A primal fear, the kind that bypasses reason and speaks directly to the soul, seized him. He stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. He turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get away from that. Ting! He crashed through brittle undergrowth, low-hanging branches scratching at his face, his lungs burning with the frigid air. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The shadow was following. It wasn't running. It was gliding over the snow, effortlessly keeping pace. It stretched and warped, its form shifting between a mimicry of his own frantic movements and something else entirely. Something alien and horrifying. The path he knew so well was gone, swallowed by the encroaching twilight and the disorienting fear. Every tree looked the same, a dark sentinel in an endless, repeating maze. The sun had long since surrendered to the horizon, leaving the world in shades of deep blue and black. Panic was a rising tide, drowning his thoughts. He could no longer see his pursuer in the gloom, but he could feel it. A cold presence that was always just behind him, a constant pressure at the edge of his senses. He tripped, his foot catching on a hidden root, and fell hard against the snow-covered ground. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment He just lay there, gasping, the cold seeping into his clothes. Exhaustion washed over him, heavy and absolute. He couldn't run anymore. He rolled onto his back, his gaze fixed on the canopy of black branches against the starless sky. The forest was utterly silent now. The cold had settled deep into his bones. He was lost. The villagers organized a search party at dawn. They called his name, their voices echoing through the silent Snowladon woods. It was a young boy who found the spot first, in a small, secluded clearing. The snow was disturbed, showing signs of a fall. But Elias was not there. There were no tracks leading away from the spot, only the single set leading to it. All that remained was his shadow, etched onto the surface of the snow. It stood upright, a perfect, dark silhouette of a man. It wasn't flat, like a normal shadow. It had a strange, almost three-dimensional quality, as if the darkness itself had been frozen solid. It just stood there, facing deeper into the forest, its featureless head tilted as if it were listening, waiting. The villagers stared in silence, a cold fear gripping their hearts. Elias was gone, but his shadow remained, a silent, unmoving guardian at the edge of the woods, forever waiting for something to emerge from the trees. Have you ever felt a sense of déjà vu so strong it rattles you to your core? What if that feeling was a warning, a desperate message sent from a future you're about to be trapped in forever? Today's story is about a man who found such a message that would lead him into an inescapable nightmare. This isn't just a campfire tale. It's a chilling exploration of time, fate, and the terrifying possibility that some warnings are meant to be broken. Our story begins on a bleak, cold afternoon, January 11th. A man named Alex was taking a long walk, trying to clear his head. He loved the solitude of the woods in winter, the way the snow muffled the world into a quiet hush. The trees stood like ancient, sleeping giants, their branches heavy with a fresh blanket of white. As he walked along a familiar but less traveled path, something glinted in the low afternoon sun. It was a small, almost imperceptible flash of light from beneath a drift of snow near the base of an old, gnarled oak tree. Curiosity piqued. He trudged over, his boots sinking deep into the powder. He knelt and brushed the snow away, his gloved fingers revealing the source of the glint. It was a small glass bottle, the kind you might see in an old apothecary. It was frozen solid, frosted over with a delicate layer of ice crystals. But what truly caught his attention was what lay inside. A small, tightly folded piece of paper was visible through the thick, slightly distorted glass. It seemed ancient, yet strangely preserved. He worked the bottle free from the frozen ground. It was surprisingly heavy, and colder than the air around it. Back at his cabin, he placed it by the crackling fireplace, the warmth slowly melting the icy prison. He watched, fascinated, as condensation trickled down its sides. He couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease, a premonition that he was about to uncover something he shouldn't. Once the bottle was thawed, he carefully uncorked it. The cork crumbled slightly, a testament to its age. With trembling fingers, he tipped the bottle over, and the folded paper slid out into his palm. It was brittle, yellowed with age, and felt delicate, as if it could turn to dust at any moment. He carefully unfolded it. The message written on it was short, stark, and terrifyingly direct, in a weird, almost frantic scrawl. It read, "Do not enter the forest on January 12th." Alex stared at the words, a cold dread washing over him that had nothing to do with the winter chill outside. January 12th. That was tomorrow. It was a specific, urgent warning. Who would leave such a message? And why? He examined the paper again, turning it over in his hands. It was the handwriting that made his blood run cold. He felt a sudden, dizzying wave of vertigo, the room seeming to tilt around him. The handwriting. It was familiar, unsettlingly, terrifyingly familiar. He rushed to his desk, pulling out an old journal he kept. He flipped through the pages, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He compared the note from the bottle to his own writing in the journal, the slant of the letters, the unique way he crossed his T's, the loop of his G's. It was a perfect match. There was no doubt, no ambiguity. The handwriting on the warning was his own. A cold sea bear, sharp and violent, ran down his spine. How could this be? He hadn't written this note. He was certain of it. He'd never even seen this bottle before today. Was it a prank? A very elaborate, very cruel joke? But who would know his handwriting so perfectly? Who would go to such lengths? The thought was absurd. The alternative, however, was far more frightening. The alternative was impossible. He spent the rest of the evening in a state of agitated confusion. He sat by the fire, the note on the table beside him, staring into the flames as if they held the answers. The warning echoed in his mind. Do not enter the forest on January 12th. His own words, his own handwriting, warning him of a day that hadn't even arrived yet. He tried to reason it out, to find a logical explanation. Maybe he'd written it years ago as a strange self-reminder and forgotten about it. But that made no sense. The bottle looked ancient, buried for who knows how long. A snight filled, a new feeling began to creep into his mind, overpowering the fear. It was curiosity, a powerful, nagging pull. What was so special about tomorrow? What was in that forest that he needed to be warned away from? The warning itself seemed to create the very temptation it was trying to prevent. It was a paradox. By telling him not to go, the message made it almost impossible for him to stay away. It felt less like a choice and more like a destiny he was being drawn toward. He felt like a character in a story, his next chapter already written. Despite the primal fear that screamed at him to lock his doors and wait out the day, he knew, with a sinking certainty, what he was going to do. The forest was calling to him. The morning of January 12th dawned gray and oppressive. The sky was a sheet of flat, white light, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Alex hadn't slept. He'd spent the night wrestling with his thoughts, the impossible note always at the center of his mind. He dressed warmly, his movements slow and deliberate, as if in a trance. He stood at his window, looking out at the tree line. The forest seemed different today. Darker, more menacing. He told himself he was just being foolish. He would just take a short walk, prove to himself that it was all a bizarre coincidence, a strange prank. He'd go in, walk the familiar loop he always did, and come right back out. He needed to demystify it, to conquer the fear by facing it. He grabbed his coat, the crumpled note still in his pocket, its presence a small, cold weight against his leg. He stepped outside. The air was still and bitterly cold. His breath plumed in front of him in a white cloud. He began walking towards the woods, each step feeling heavier than the last. The snow crunched loudly under his boots, the only sound in the unnerving quiet. As he reached the edge of the trees, he paused. He looked back at his cabin one last time. A part of the rational part, was screaming at him to turn back, to heed the warning written in his own hand. But the pull was too strong. Curiosity, or perhaps something more, sinister if it had him in its grip. He took a deep breath, the frigid air burning his lungs, and stepped into the forest. The moment he was under the canopy of the trees, the world changed. The oppressive silence deepened. The snow on the branches seemed to absorb all sound. He walked for what felt like only a few minutes, following a path he'd walked 100 times before. He looked around, trying to spot anything unusual, anything that might explain the bizarre warning. But there was nothing. Just trees, snow, and silence. He reached a small clearing and stopped. A strange feeling came over him, a sense of dislocation, of time itself feeling thin and stretched. He felt a sudden, intense chill, far colder than the winter air. He pulled the note from his pocket, his hand shaking uncontrollably now. He looked at the words, "Do not enter the forest on January 12th. And then he felt an overwhelming, desperate urge. An urge to warn someone, to warn himself. He didn't understand why, but he knew what he had to do. He found an empty bottle lying half buried in the snow, almost as if it was waiting for him. His mind felt foggy, his actions not entirely his own. He took out his pen and a spare piece of paper from his wallet. With a frantic, shaking hand, he wrote the exact same words he'd read just yesterday. his own handwriting, a perfect replica of the note he held. He folded the paper, pushed it into the bottle, and stoppered it tightly. He buried it in the snow, at the base of that same gnarled oak tree. As soon as he had done it, the world around him seemed to flicker, to waver like a heat haze. The trees blurred. The snow dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. He felt a wrenching, pulling sensation, as if he was being turned inside out. And then, nothing. Alex vanished. He was gone without a trace. No footprints leading away from the clearing, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. A year passé, the seasons turned. Winter returned to the forest, blanketing it once more in a deep, silent layer of snow. On a cold January 11th, a young hiker, exploring the woods, saw a glint of light from beneath a snowdrift. He knelt down and brushed the snow away, revealing a small, frozen glass bottle. Inside, he could see a folded piece of paper. Later that day, in the warmth of his home, he managed to uncork the bottle and unfold the brittle, yellowed paper. On it was a single, frantic message. It read, "Do not enter the forest on January 12th." The hiker looked at the note, a strange feeling of unease prickling his skin. The date was tomorrow, and the handwriting, it was eerily familiar. He couldn't quite place it, but he felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he realized the handwriting matched his own. The forest hadn't just predicted Alex's arrival. It had created the prediction. It had used him to bait its own trap, ensnaring him in an eternal loop. He was now a ghost in time forever, condemned to relive that final day, to write the warning that he himself would find, and to disappear into the woods, resetting the cycle for the next unfortunate soul who looked a little too much like him. The warning wasn't meant to save him. It was the mechanism of the trap itself, a terrifying, unbreakable cycle of fate, written in his own hand. What do you think? Was it the forest itself that was malevolent, or was it a glitch in time? Let me know your theories down in the comments. This story really makes you think about fate and free will. Have you ever heard a sound that sends a shiver down your spine? A sound so out of place, so impossibly familiar, that it makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Tonight, we're venturing deep into a snow-covered forest, where a rescue team stumbled upon something that defies all explanation. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a chilling account of a voice that should not have existed. A warning from a place we cannot see. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to question what's real and what's not. Our story begins on a night when the snow fell so thick it seemed to swallow the world whole. A seasoned search and rescue team was pushing through the biting wind and blinding snow of the Blackwood Forest. It was a place known for its treacherous terrain and sudden, violent storms. For hours, they had been searching for a lost hiker, but the conditions were getting worse by the minute. The trees, heavy with snow, groaned under the weight, their branches forming a dense, dark canopy overhead. Visibility was almost zero. Their hyperward flashlights cut weak circles into the swirling white chaos, illuminating little more than the falling flakes just a few feet ahead. The only sound was the howling wind and the crunch of their boots on the snow. Team leader, a man named Marcus, was a veteran of countless rescue missions. He was calm, focused, and knew these woods better than anyone. He kept his team tight, their communication constant through their handheld radios. But as the storm intensified, even their state-of-the-art equipment began to struggle. The signal was weak, filled with static that crackled and hissed like an angry snake. They were about to call off the search for the night and regroup at base camp when it happened. A sudden burst of static erupted from every radio on the team. It was louder, more aggressive than before. They all stopped, listening intently. And then, through the noise, a voice. It was faint, desperate. "Help, ... Can anyone hear me? I'm trapped ... Please, help me." A wave of relief, mixed with urgency, washed over the team. This had to be the lost hiker. They were close. Marcus grabbed his radio. "This is Rescue 1. We hear you. Can you tell us your location? Can you see our lights?" The team fanned out slightly, their beams sweeping the dense woods around them, hoping to catch a glimpse of a reflector. a piece of clothing, anything. But the forest remained dark and empty. The only response was more static, followed by the same voice, now weaker, filled with more panic. "It's so cold, ... I can't feel my legs. Please, ... Is anyone out there?" The voice sounded terrified, as if it was being swallowed by the storm itself. The team members exchanged glances. There was something unsettling about the transmission. The voice seemed to echo in a strange way, as if it wasn't just coming from their radios, but from the forest all around them. It was a subtle, disorienting effect that made it impossible to pinpoint a direction. Marcus pressed the transmit button again. "Stay calm. We're trying to get a lock on your signal. Keep talking to us. What can you see around you?" He was trying to keep the survivor focused, to give them hope. But as he spoke, his second in command, a younger man named Ben, moved closer to him, his face pale in the glow of his headlamp. Ben had a strange, horrified look in his eyes. He leaned in, gesturing toward the radio on Marcus's chest. "Sir," Ben whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Listen. Just listen to the voice," Marcus Pau said, confused by Ben's reaction. He raised the radio closer to his ear, shutting out the sound of the wind. The voice came through again, a desperate, broken plea. "The trees... ... they're closing in. I'm lost. I don't know where I am... ... And in that moment, a cold dread, colder than the freezing air, washed over Marcus. He felt it spread through his body, turning his blood to ice. He recognized the voice. He knew every inflection, every hint of strain, every subtle tremor of fear. The team members standing nearby had also frozen in place. One by one, their faces turned from concern to pure, unadulterated terror. They looked from their radios to the man standing right beside them. The panicked, desperate voice crying for help from the static-filled ether was the voice of their team leader, Marcus. An impossible silence fell over the group, broken only by the howling wind and the crackling radio. Marcus was standing right there, solid and real, his own radio in his hand, yet his voice, filled with a terror he wasn't showing, was pleading for help from a place they couldn't see. He looked at his team, his own expression mirroring their shock and disbelief. How could this be happening? It was his voice, but it wasn't him speaking. It was like hearing an echo of his own soul, trapped somewhere else, screaming for rescue. Ben stammered, "Marcus, that's you. How is that you?" But Marcus had no answer. He was as baffled and terrified as they were. Was it some kind of bizarre radio echo? A freak signal bounce caused by the storm in the mountains? But the emotion in the voice was too raw, too real. It wasn't just a recording. It felt live. It felt like it was happening right now. The voice on the radio cried out again, and this time it was a gut-wrenching scream of pure terror that cut through the static, followed by a choked whisper. "It's got me ... double quotes." Then silence. Just the hiss of the empty channel. The team stood motionless, paralyzed by fear. The logical, rational world they operated in had just shattered. Marcus tried to radio back, his hands shaking. "Who is this? Identify yourself." "This is a secure channel." But there was no reply. The forest seemed to press in on them, the darkness between the trees deeper and more menacing than before. They were no longer just a rescue team looking for a lost hiker. They were now intruders in a place that operated by its own sinister rules. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of snow-laden branches sounded like a footstep. They decided to abandon the search immediately and head back to base camp. The mission was compromised, the team was spooked, and something was fundamentally wrong. They moved as a single unit, back to back, their flashlights cutting frantic arcs into the darkness, searching for a threat they couldn't define. But the forest remained silent and empty. As they trudged through the snow, the radio on Marcus's chest crackled to life one more time. It wasn't a plea for help this time. It was a single, whispered word, in his own voice. But it sounded ancient and weary. "Run." That was the last transmission they heard that night. The team pushed on, driven by a primal fear. not stopping until the faint lights of their base camp appeared through the trees. They burst into the main tent, breathless and shaken, trying to explain the impossible event to the crew waiting there. No one slept that night. They sat with the radios, listening to the static, waiting for the voice to return, but it never did. They tried to rationalize a prank, a crossed signal, auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and exhaustion, but none of them truly believed it. They had all heard it. They had all seen the look on Marcus's face as the first light of dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in pale shades of gray and pink. The storm finally subsided. The world was eerily quiet. A sense of normalcy began to return, and the events of the night started to feel like a shared nightmare. But then, they did a head count. 1.2.3.4.5. One person was missing. Marcus was gone. Panic erupted. They searched the camp, calling his name. His tent was empty. His sleeping bag was untouched. He hadn't come back with them, but that was impossible. They all remembered him entering the base camp tent, his face ashen with fear. They had all spoken to him. Ben, who had been by his side the entire time, swore Marcus had walked back with him. Yet, there was no sign of him. They retraced their steps back into the forest, following their own tracks from the night before. The path was clear in the fresh snow, and then they found it. About halfway back to where they had heard the transmission, lying half buried in the snow, was a single object. It was Marcus's radio. As they got closer, they could hear a faint sound coming from it. It was a voice. His voice held, "Can anyone hear me? I'm trapped. ... It was repeating the same desperate pleas from the night before, over and over, like a broken record. A ghostly loop of his final moments of terror. The search for the lost hiker was called off. A new search began. A massive, week-long operation to find the missing team leader. They combed every inch of that forest. They brought in helicopters, canine units, and expert trackers. But they found nothing. No footprints leading away from the radio. No signs of a struggle. No trace of Marcus at all. It was as if the forest, or whatever lurked within it, had simply swallowed him whole, leaving only his voice behind as a chilling souvenir. The rescue team was disbanded, its members too haunted by what they had experienced to continue. The story became a legend among local search and rescue circles, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. They say that on stormy nights, if you tune a radio to the right frequency near Blackwood Forest, you can still hear him, a faint, desperate voice echoing through the static, a team leader forever lost, forever calling for a rescue that will never come. His voice no longer just a plea, but a warning to all who dare to enter the woods after dark. A reminder that some places hold secrets that are not meant to be discovered, and some voices should never be answered. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. What do you think happened to Marcus? Was it a supernatural entity? A bizarre natural phenomena? Or something else entirely? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're completely alone? Imagine a place where that feeling is real, where the very air around you is aware of your presence. There's a forest, ancient and vast, known not for its beauty, but for the stories of those who never returned. For generations, travelers have ventured into its deep, verdant maze, only to vanish without a trace. Each disappearance is a unique tragedy, a life abruptly cut short, yet they all share a haunting similarity. They all happened here, within the silent, watchful woods. The local legends, whispered around crackling fires on cold nights, speak of the forest in hushed, fearful tones. They say it's not just a collection of trees and earth, it's a living entity, a vast, silent consciousness. They believe the forest remembers everyone who dares to cross its threshold. It doesn't just swallow them whole, it absorbs them, their fear, their final desperate cries, their very essence. It all becomes part of the woods. The whispers you hear on the wind. They say those are the voices of the lost, trapped forever among the rustling leaves. A few have made it out, stumbling from the tree line, pale and trembling, their eyes wide with a terror they can't fully articulate. They talk of a suffocating sense of being observed, a feeling that lingered long after they escaped. They would see fleeting shadows in their peripheral vision, hear faint whispers in the dead of night, and feel a cold dread that followed them back to the safety of their homes. It was as if a piece of the forest had latched onto their soul, a constant, chilling reminder that it knew where they were, and it was watching. They were the lucky ones, the ones who got away, but they were never truly free. Now, let's follow one such traveler. A lone wanderer named Alistair. He was a seasoned outdoorsman, skeptical of old tales, and confident in his ability to navigate any wilderness. He entered the forest at dawn, dismissing the local warnings as simple superstition. The woods were beautiful, he admitted. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the mossy ground and shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was crisp and clean. For the first few hours, everything felt normal, peaceful, even. But as the sun began its descent, a subtle wrongness crept into the air. It started small. A twig snapped behind him, but when he turned, there was nothing. He'd find footprints on the trail, running parallel to his own, but they were too faint, too strange, and they didn't match his boots. They would appear and then vanish, as if the walker was stepping between worlds. He tried to rationalize it. Animals, the wind, his own fatigue playing tricks on him. But the feeling of being watched intensified, growing from a prickle on his neck to a heavy, suffocating weight on his chest. As darkness fell, the forest transformed. The peaceful woods of the day became a labyrinth of menacing shapes and deep, impenetrable blackness. Alistair made camp, building a fire that pushed back the shadows, but seemed to make the surrounding darkness even deeper. And then, the whispers began. At first, it was just a faint murmur, indistinguishable from the rustling leaves. But then, it became clearer. It was his name, Alistair, a soft, sibilant whisper carried on the wind, seeming to come from all directions at once. His heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed a heavy branch, his knuckles white, and scanned the darkness beyond his fire. Nothing. No eyes glinting in the dark. No silhouette of a person or beast. There was only the oppressive silence between the whispers. He saw shadows flicker and dance at the edge of the firelight, moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. They stretched and writhed, separating from the objects that cast them, moving with an independent, sinister life of their own. It was in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror that the horrifying realization dawned on him. The stories weren't just stories. The forest wasn't just a place. It was alive. It was aware. And it was studying him. It didn't need to send a monster or a predator to hunt him down. It didn't need to chase him. That was too crude, too simple. Its method was far more terrifying. It simply observed. It watched, patiently and silently, from every leaf, every branch, every shadow. It was learning him, memorizing every detail, the rhythm of his breathing, the frantic beat of his heart, the scent of his fear. It was cataloging his existence. With the first light of dawn, Alistair abandoned his camp and ran. He didn't care about his gear. He just needed to get out. He ran blindly, desperately, crashing through undergrowth, his only thought to escape the suffocating presence that surrounded him. But the forest seemed to conspire against him. Paths that were clear moments before would suddenly become blocked by fallen trees. Creeks he had easily crossed were now raging torrents. The familiar landmarks he'd noted on his way in had vanished, replaced by an endless, repeating landscape of identical trees. He was lost. Not just geographically lost, but fundamentally lost. He was an intruder in a place that knew him better than he knew himself. As he paused, gasping for breath, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient oak, the final, soul-crushing truth struck him with the force of a physical blow. The forest didn't need to learn about him anymore. It already knew him. Every step he took, every panicked breath, every bead of sweat that ran down his face, it was all being recorded, absorbed into the forest's immense, silent memory. He realized he wasn't just running from a place. He was running from an intelligence that had cataloged countless others before him. He thought of the vanished travelers, of their last moments. Had they felt this same chilling intimacy? Had they realized, just before the end, that the forest knew their deepest fears, their most secret hopes, their very names. He was no longer Alistair, the Wanderer. He was just another entry in the forest's vast, dark library of souls. His fear was no longer his own. It was becoming part of the forest's atmosphere, a new layer of dread for the next unlucky traveler to experience. And this is where the story turns towards you. You've been listening, haven't you? You've been watching, absorbing these details, following Alistair's journey into terror. You might be sitting in a well-lit room, miles away from any dark wood, feeling safe and secure. But through this story, a connection has been made. The tale of the forest is not just a tale. It's a seed. And by hearing it, you've allowed that seed to be planted in your mind. The forest's reach is not limited by physical distance. Its awareness spreads through the stories told about it. It learns through the attention it receives. As you listened to Alistair's plight, as you pictured the whispering trees and the moving shadows, the forest noticed. It felt your attention, your flicker of fear, your morbid curiosity. It has added you to its collection. A new file has been opened, labeled with your name, created from the echoes of your thoughts as you engaged with this story. You might dismiss this as a scary story, a bit of fun to send a shiver down your spine. But the next time you're walking alone at night and hear a twig snap behind you, you'll remember. The next time you see a shadow move in the corner of your eye, you'll hesitate. The next time you hear a faint whisper on the wind, you'll wonder if it's just the breeze, or if it's something else. Something calling to you. The forest is patient. It has all the time in the world. It waits, and it remembers. It remembers the sound of your silence as you listened. It remembers the slight quickening of your pulse. It knows you now, and one day, when you least expect it, in a quiet moment, in the dead of night, you might just hear it. A soft, sibilant whisper, carrying on the wind, seeming to come from all directions at once, and it will be calling your name. Deep within the untamed heart of a sprawling, ancient forest, a place where sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, a team of seasoned explorers made a discovery that would forever haunt the woods. It was a small, solitary grave, almost swallowed by the relentless encroachment of nature. There was no headstone, no marker, not even a simple cross to signify who lay beneath the frozen earth. The snow surrounding it was a pristine, unbroken blanket, suggesting that no one had visited, or perhaps even noticed, this lonely spot for decades, maybe even centuries. A profound and somber silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow, driven by a mix of professional curiosity and a touch of human empathy for the forgotten soul. They gathered around the small mound. They brushed away the top layer of snow, hoping to find some clue, some fragment of a name or a date. But there was nothing. It was just a patch of frozen ground, a void where an identity should have been. One of the explorers, Aistorian, Named Alistair, felt a strange compulsion. He knelt down his breath, misting in the frigid air, and traced the empty space with his gloved finger. Acting on an impulse he couldn't explain, he spoke into the silence, reading the nothingness as if it were a name. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, yet it seemed to echo unnaturally through the trees. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. A bone-chilling wind ripped through the clearing, not a natural gust, but a focused, malevolent force that seemed to emanate directly from the grave. It howled like a tormented spirit, whipping snow into a frenzy around them. The once still flakes began to swirl and dance in unnatural patterns, forming strange, shifting shapes in the air. The explorers exchanged panicked glances, their scientific minds struggling to comprehend what was happening. It was then they felt a palpable, invisible presence. It was a feeling of being watched, of being scrutinized by something ancient and filled with an unspeakable sorrow. The air grew heavy, pressing down on them, and a sense of profound dread settled in their hearts. Alistair, the one who had spoken, was the first to feel its direct influence. He tried to stand, to back away from the grave, but his body wouldn't obey. It felt as if an immense weight was pulling him down, his feet sinking into the snow as if it were quicksand. He cried out, his voice strained. The others rushed to help him, grabbing his arms. but it was like trying to move a statue carved from stone. The very ground seemed to resist them, clinging to Alistair with an unyielding grip. An unseen force was pulling him, slowly but inexorably, toward the nameless grave. His face was a mask of sheer terror as he felt his life force being drained away, his movements becoming sluggish, his thoughts clouded by a creeping, cold despair. Then, one by one, the others who had been standing near the grave, who had heard Alistair's question echo, began to experience the same horrifying phenomenon. A woman named Lena screamed as she felt an icy hand grip her ankle, though nothing was there. She was dragged, inch by painful inch, across the snow. Another explorer, a burly man named Marcus, fought with all his might, his muscles straining against the invisible pull. But his strength was useless. It was as if the forest itself had turned against them, its ancient roots and frozen soil conspiring to claim them. Their pleas for help became weaker, their struggles more frantic, as they were drawn closer and closer to the epicenter of the horror. The remaining members of the team, those who had stood further back, could only watch in frozen terror, powerless to intervene. The scene was a slow, silent nightmare unfolding under the dim, gray light of the winter sky. As the first faint rays of dawn pierced the gloom, a chilling silence fell over the clearing once more. The wind died down, the snow settled, and the oppressive presence receded, leaving behind an eerie calm. But the explorers who had been pulled toward the grave were gone, vanished. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothing. It was as if they had simply been erased from existence. The only evidence that they had ever been there was a series of footprints in the snow. Each set of tracks led directly to the edge of the small, unmarked grave. And then they just stopped. The snow beyond the grave was as undisturbed as it had been when they first arrived. It was a physical impossibility, a terrifying testament to the supernatural event that had transpired. Days turned into weeks, and rescue parties combed the forest, searching for the missing team. They found their abandoned camp, their equipment, their research notes detailing the discovery of the grave. But of the people themselves, there was no trace. The forest kept its secret locked away. Eventually, the search was called off, and the story of the vanished explorers became another dark legend whispered among locals, a cautionary tale about the perils of the deep woods. But the grave was not finished. It waited patiently, a patient predator cloaked in snow and silence. Months later, a lone hiker, lost and seeking shelter from an approaching blizzard, stumbled into the same clearing. He saw the small, lonely mound of earth and felt a strange sense of pity. As he drew closer, he noticed something odd in the freshly fallen snow atop the grave. Scratched into the white surface, as if by an unseen finger, was a name. He leaned in to read it, his blood running cold as he recognized the letters. It was his own name. He tried to scream, to run, but a sudden, violent wind kicked up, and he felt his feet become heavy, rooting him to the spot. The forest had found its next victim, and so it continues. The nameless grave in the heart of the forest remains, a perpetual trap for the unwary. Each new visitor who finds it, drawn by a morbid curiosity or simply by chance, is met with the same chilling sight. Etched into the snow or the dirt or the fallen leaves is their own name, a personal invitation to oblivion. Tay read it, and in that moment, their fate is sealed. The forest claims them, their footprints joining the countless others that lead to the edge of the grave and then disappear forever. The grave remains nameless, but it is never truly empty. It is a vessel of sorrow, a memorial to all the names it has consumed, a silent, hungry entity waiting in the endless winter. If you ever find yourself walking in those woods and come across a small, lonely grave with no marker, do not stop. Do not look too closely. And whatever you do, do not read the name that you will surely find waiting there for you. Just turn and run, and pray the forest lets you go. Have you ever been alone in the woods at night? The kind of deep, dark forest where every snap of a twig sounds like a footstep, and the wind whispering through the leaves sounds like a voice. Tonight, we're going deep into one of those forests to tell a story that'll make you think twice before ever hiking alone again. This is the story of Daniel, a man who heard a sound he couldn't ignore, a melody that promised mystery but delivered something far more sinister. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. The sun had already dipped below the jagged peaks of the mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. For Daniel, an experienced hiker, this was the best time to be in the forest. The day's heat was gone, replaced by a cool, hintly breeze, and the woods came alive with the sounds of the evening. He navigated the familiar trail with ease, his heavy-duty boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest was his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the city faded into a distant memory, replaced by the symphony of nature. He breathed in the rich, earthy scent of damp soil and pine, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. But on this particular evening, something was different. Amidst the usual chorus of chirping crickets and the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, a new sound emerged. It was a whistler, soft, melodic tune that seemed to weave itself through the trees. It was faint at first, so faint that Daniel almost dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on his ears. He stopped in his tracks, tilting his head to listen more closely. The wind sighed through the canopy above. But this was no random gust. The sound was deliberate, a clear, repeating melody. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic, yet completely out of place in the heart of this remote wilderness. Who would be whistling out here? Miles from any road or civilization, a shiver, not from the cold, traced its way down his spine. The tune seemed to be calling to him, a siren's song, beckoning him to leave the well-worn path. Every instinct, honed by years of hiking, screamed at him to turn back, to head for the safety of his car. But another part of him, a more curious, more reckless part, was captivated. The melody was unlike anything he had ever heard, both enchanting and unsettling. He took a hesitant step off the trail, then another, the strange music pulling him deeper into the darkening woods. The forest floor grew uneven under his feet as he pushed past low-hanging branches and tangled vines. The marked trail was now just a memory behind him. He was guided only by the sound, a ghostly breadcrumb trail leading him into the unknown. As he ventured further, the whistling grew louder, clearer, but it was also becoming more disorienting. At one moment it seemed to be coming from directly in front of him. The next, it was behind him. Then, it felt as though the sound was all around him, emanating from the very trees themselves, a multi-layered harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. The forest had become an orchestra, and he was its sole audience member. As twilight bled into true night, the shadows between the trees began to twist and writhe. They stretched and coiled, no longer static shapes, but living things. In his peripheral vision, Daniel thought he saw them moving, dancing in perfect rhythm with the whistling tune. He'd whip his head around, his heart pounding, only to find nothing but a gnarled oak or a cluster of ferns. He shone his flashlight into the oppressive darkness, its beam cutting a sharp but narrow path. The light revealed only more trees, an endless, monotonous wall of bark and leaves. But the moment he moved the light, the shadows would reform, swaying and pulsing to the phantom melody. He was certain he wasn't alone, yet he saw no one. The feeling of being watched was immense, a heavy pressure on his shoulders. "Hey!" Cadet out his voice, sounding small and weak in the vastness of the woods. "Hello. Is anyone there?" His words were swallowed by the trees, met only with silence, followed by the resumption of the relentless whistling. Fear, cold and sharp, began to replace his curiosity. This was no prank. This was something else, something ancient and wrong. He tried to retrace his steps, to find the trail he had so foolishly abandoned. But everything looked the same. Every tree was a twin of the last, every patch of moss identical. Panic began to set in, his breathing growing ragged. He was lost. Hopelessly, terrifyingly lost. The melody, which had once been intriguing, was now a torment. A mocking lullaby in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Stumbled, undriven by a desperate need to escape the sound. Yet it was always there, a constant companion in the dark. Hours crawled by. The moon cast a pale, ghostly light through the canopy, but it offered little comfort. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth with no exit. Exhaustion gnawed at him, his legs aching, his mind frayed. The whistling never stopped, never faltered. It was the only constant in the shifting, menacing landscape. At some point, he collapsed at the base of a massive, ancient tree, the rough bark digging into his back. He was too tired to move, too scared to sleep. He closed his eyes, and the whistling was the last thing he heard. The next morning, when Daniel failed to return home, his family raised the alarm. Search and rescue teams were dispatched immediately. Combing the forest he was known to frequent, they found his car at the trailhead, exactly where he'd left it. They followed the marked path for miles, calling his name, their voices echoing through the silent woods. They found a set of footprints leading off the main trail, a clear sign that he had ventured into the deeper, uncharted parts of the forest. The tracks were easy to follow at first, but then, in a small clearing, they just stopped. There was no sign of a struggle, no scuff marks, no broken branches. It was as if Daniel had simply been plucked from the earth, vanishing into thin air. The search continued for days, then weeks. Helicopters flew overhead, dogs sniffed the ground, and volunteers scoured every inch of that sprawling wilderness. But they found nothing. No scrap of clothing, no dropped equipment, not a single trace of the missing hiker. It was one of the most baffling disappearance cases the local authorities had ever seen. Daniel was gone, but the story doesn't quite end there. Long after the official search was called off, some of the rescuers and locals who venture near that part of the forest have reported something strange. On quiet evenings, when the wind is just right, they say you can hear it. A faint, melodic whistling, echoing softly through the trees. It's a beautiful, haunting tune that seems to carry on the breeze, a sorrowful melody without a source. It's as if the forest itself is humming a song, a quiet, chilling reminder of the wanderer it claimed. Some say it's just the wind, a natural phenomenon. But others, those who know the story of Daniel, believe it's the forest, mocking its lost victim, and perhaps, just perhaps, calling for its next one. So if you ever find yourself walking in the woods and you hear a melody that doesn't belong, what will you do? Will you let curiosity win? Or will you turn and run? And as our story fades into the night, I hope the shadows felt gentle and the silence kind. If your eyes are feeling heavy, let them close. Let the echoes of this tale drift quietly away with your thoughts. If you've found comfort here tonight, you're always welcome to return. New stories will be waiting for you just beyond the dark. Feel free to like the video or subscribe if this space brings you peace, but only when it feels right for you. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply, and remember, even in the quiet darkness, you are never alone.